Let me tell you something that has never ceased to amaze me in half a century of sitting across from people in pain. They come into my office, strong people, intelligent people, people who know better, and they sit down, and within 5 minutes they say some version of the same sentence. They say it quietly, sometimes ashamed, sometimes defiant. I know he was terrible for me. I know she was toxic. I know, but I miss them so much I can't breathe. And I always pause. I always let that sit in the room for a moment. Because what they're confessing isn't weakness. What they're describing is one of the most profound, most human psychological experiences that exists. And if we're going to understand it, really understand it, not just nod and say trauma bond like it's a complete answer, we have to go deep. We have to go all the way down, so pull up a chair, because this is going to take a while, and it's going to be worth it. Let's start where everything starts, in the body, in the wiring. I've been practicing psychology since before the internet existed, since before we had brain scans that could show us live footage of what love does to a human mind. When that research started coming in, it confirmed everything I had seen in my office for decades. It gave a language to what my patients had been experiencing and couldn't explain. Here is the first thing you need to understand. Your brain cannot distinguish between love and addiction. I mean that literally, neurologically. When you are in an intense relationship, especially a volatile, unpredictable one, your brain releases the same cocktail of chemicals as cocaine: dopamine, norepinephrine, oxytocin. These aren't metaphors. These are molecules flooding your bloodstream, lighting up the same reward circuitry that gets hijacked by heroin. And now, here's the cruel part, the part that explains everything. The brain releases the most dopamine, not when reward is consistent, but when it is intermittent, unpredictable, random. Psychologists call this variable ratio reinforcement. B.F. Skinner discovered it decades ago with pigeons and levers, and it is the most powerful behavioral conditioning mechanism that exists. Slot machines are built on this principle. So are toxic relationships. Think about the person you're missing right now, the one who hurt you. Was the relationship consistent? Of course not. There were horrible moments, but there were also extraordinary ones, weren't there? Moments of breathtaking tenderness after the storm. Moments where they looked at you like you were the only person in the world. Moments of warmth so intense precisely because you had been cold for so long. Your brain experienced those moments as the jackpot, and it became addicted. Not to the person exactly, but to the possibility of that person. To the slot machine. When the relationship ends, your brain doesn't process it as relief. It processes it as withdrawal. The dopamine crashes, the norepinephrine drops, and you feel it physically, in your chest, in your stomach, in the strange exhaustion that comes from doing nothing at all. That's not drama. That's neuroscience. Now think about this. When you close your eyes and miss this person, what exactly are you seeing? What is the image? In 50 years of asking that question, almost no one describes the person at their worst. They don't conjure the moment they were screamed at, or belittled, or betrayed. They conjure something else entirely. A specific laugh, a specific afternoon, the way their hands looked, a quiet sentence that once felt warm and safe. They are not missing the person as a whole. They are missing a fragment, a curated, precious, almost fictional fragment. And here is what that tells me. What you're really mourning is a version of yourself. Because in that fragment, in that specific afternoon, that laugh, you existed in a particular way. You were hopeful, you were open, you believed love could be like this. The relationship, for all its damage, also contained your capacity for joy, your willingness to be vulnerable, your aliveness. When the relationship ends, that version of you feels like it died with it. I had a patient, I'll call her Eleanor, who came to me after leaving a man who had, over 3 years, slowly dismantled her self-worth. He wasn't violent. He was something almost more insidious, intermittently wonderful. She left him, and she grieved him so hard she couldn't work for 2 months. One day I asked her, "When you miss him, what do you feel in your body?" She thought for a long time and finally said, "Possibility. I feel possibility." And I asked, "When did you last feel that before him?" She went very quiet. The grief, we discovered together, wasn't really about him. It was about a door inside herself that had briefly swung open. And when the relationship collapsed, she assumed it was he who had opened it. She couldn't imagine that door opening again without him. That is the real tragedy, not that we miss the person, but that we outsource our capacity for feeling to them, and then believe we've lost that capacity when they leave. Now let's go back even further, because none of this starts with the person who hurt you. It starts much, much earlier. John Bowlby, one of the great giants of my field, spent his life studying attachment, how infants bond, what they need, what happens when those needs are met, and what happens when they aren't. What he found, and what decades of research have confirmed, is that our earliest relationships create a template, a kind of emotional blueprint that we carry everywhere, often without any awareness at all. If you grew up with a caregiver who was consistently warm, consistently present, consistently safe, you learned that love is something you can trust. Something that doesn't require constant anxiety to maintain. And when you grow up, you tend to find that kind of love familiar, comfortable, right? But many people, far more than we like to admit, grew up with something different. Maybe a parent who was loving sometimes and cold other times, without any pattern you could decode. Maybe someone who withheld affection and then suddenly gave it. Maybe someone whose love always felt slightly conditional. Like you were one mistake away from losing it. If that was your template, something fascinating and heartbreaking happens when you grow up and go looking for love. You don't seek out what is good for you. You seek out what feels like home, and home, for you, was unpredictable. Home was anxious. Home was the desperate need to be seen by someone who wasn't fully seeing you. Home was earning love rather than simply having it. So when you encounter a person who is intermittently wonderful and intermittently cruel, something in you recognizes them. Not consciously, not with a thought you can articulate, but in your nervous system, in your gut, in the part of you that is still 4 years old, trying to figure out how to make someone love you. That person feels familiar. They feel like the real thing. And when they leave, or when you finally leave, the grief isn't just for them. It's for the entire architecture of longing they represented. It's for the original wound that created the blueprint in the first place. This is why people often find themselves in a series of similar relationships. Not because they're stupid, not because they don't learn, but because the blueprint keeps running quietly in the background, like software you didn't know was installed. There's another dimension to this that we don't talk about enough. One that is psychological, but also almost literary. Human beings are storytelling creatures. We don't just live events, we narrate them. We construct meaning. We build arcs. And one of the most powerful drives in human psychology is the need for completion, for resolution, for the story to make sense. The Zeigarnik effect, named after the psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik, describes something simple. We remember incomplete things far better than finished ones. The unfinished haunts us. A healthy relationship that ends with understanding and closure is painful, yes, but it can be completed. You can grieve it and eventually set it down. But a relationship with someone who hurt you rarely ends cleanly. It ends in confusion, unanswered questions, strange conversations, things that never made sense. And so your mind keeps writing the story. You replay conversations, looking for the sentence that explains everything. You imagine alternate versions, what you should have said, what they might have meant, the version of events where it all makes sense. This isn't pathology. It's your mind doing exactly what it was designed to do, seeking completion. The tragedy is that the completion you're searching for probably doesn't exist. You're trying to solve an equation that has no solution. And stopping the search can feel like accepting that the pain meant nothing, which is often more unbearable than the loss itself. Let me tell you about another patient, a man in his 50s, I'll call him David, who came to see me 3 years after leaving an emotionally abusive marriage. 3 years, and he still missed her. Not all of her. Not the version that made him feel small. But something. Eventually we found it. When he was with her, David had a role. He was the caretaker, the one who solved problems, the one who kept things from falling apart. He was needed, constantly, exhaustingly needed. And that neediness, painful as it was, had given him something else: identity. Without her, he didn't know who he was. Not dramatically, just quietly. He woke up in the morning and there was no crisis to manage, no fragility to soothe, and he felt a strange blankness where his self used to be. He didn't miss her, he missed having a self. This is more common than people realize. In intense relationships, especially with volatile or emotionally immature partners, we often organize our identity around the relationship. We become the one who loves more, the one who tries harder, the one who stays. These roles, painful as they are, give shape to the self. They answer the question, who am I? I am the person who loves this difficult human. I am the person who hasn't given up. When the relationship ends, that role disappears, and the self built around it quietly collapses, like a house when the central beam is removed. And you miss them because you cannot yet distinguish between missing them and missing the structure of yourself. I also have to talk about the body here, because many people experience this grief physically and feel confused or ashamed of that. The longing for someone who hurt you does not live only in your mind. It lives in your hands, your neck, the empty space beside you in bed at night. The nervous system learns people. After months or years of shared life, meals, sleep, ordinary days, your nervous system becomes co-regulated with that person. Their presence becomes part of your baseline sense of safety. Your heart rate, your cortisol levels, your sense that the world is manageable. When they're gone, your nervous system experiences it as a rupture. It sends signals, what we feel as longing, trying to restore the missing regulator. It isn't asking whether that person was good for you. The nervous system is not a moral philosopher, it is a survival system. And it learned that this person meant regulation. This is why the missing can feel so physical and so hard to reason with. You can know, logically, every reason that person was wrong for you. You can list them, recite them. And still, at 2 a.m, your hands reach across the sheets. The cortex and the nervous system are not the same conversation. Now, one more mechanism, and then we'll get to what I consider the most important part. Human memory is not a recording device. It is a reconstruction engine. Every time you remember something, you are not playing back a saved file. You are rebuilding it from fragments. And in the process, you inevitably edit it. And the editing follows emotional logic, not factual logic. When someone is present in our lives, causing us pain, confusing us, making us feel terrible, we experience the full complexity of them. The bad is bad. We can see it clearly because we are living inside it. But when someone is gone, when the relationship ends and they become memory rather than reality, something shifts. The bad things begin to fade. They remain technically in memory, but they lose their texture, their weight. They become abstract. The good things, however, the beautiful fragments, the tender moments, the version of them that briefly appeared and made you believe all the rest was worth it, those become more vivid. They don't fade the same way. They seem to grow. Why? Because loss triggers mourning, and mourning activates the part of us that searches for value in what we've lost. We need the loss to have meant something. And so we unconsciously curate the memory, elevating what was precious and muting what was painful, until the person we are missing barely resembles the person we actually experienced. You are not missing a person. You are missing a myth. A myth your own mind has constructed for a very specific emotional purpose. And myths are extraordinarily hard to let go of. Because you can't argue with a myth the way you can argue with a fact. You can show someone evidence that a person was destructive, and they'll say, yes, but you didn't see them that morning when the light was in their hair and they said that thing. You can't counter a myth with a fact. You have to replace it, slowly, gently, painstakingly, with a richer and truer story. All right. We're here. This is the part I've been building toward for 50 years. If you've recognized yourself in anything I've said, if you've nodded or flinched or quietly thought, oh God, that's me, then I want you to hear this next part very carefully. The missing is not a problem to be solved. It is information to be read. Every element of this longing, the addiction-like craving, the incomplete narrative, the collapsed sense of self, the reaching nervous system, the myth you've constructed, every part of it is pointing at something. not at the person you lost, at you, and the parts of yourself that need attention, sometimes attention they have been waiting for decades. The craving for the intermittent reward points at what you believe you deserve, at what you've learned to accept as the price of love. The incomplete story points at your need for meaning, and at the difficult work of accepting that some things simply do not make sense. The collapsed identity may be the most important signal of all. It points at the self that was never fully built. The person you are when no one needs saving, when no drama structures your days. That person is not absent. They are simply waiting. The reaching nervous system needs tenderness. It needs time, safety, regularity. It doesn't need the person who hurt you. It needs you to create what that person once provided, through your routines, your stability, and relationships that are steady and real. And the myth? The myth needs to be looked at clearly, not harshly, and not by turning the other person into a villain, because that is just another myth, but fully. The bad moments need to be added back in, with their real texture and their real weight, with the memory of how it actually felt to live inside them. Grief is not the enemy. Grief is not evidence that you made a mistake or that you're weak. Grief is the price of having been open, of having let someone matter. Whatever else that person did, they became important to you. That importance was real. The love you brought to the relationship was real. And that deserves to be mourned, fully and without shame. What doesn't deserve to continue indefinitely is the myth, the waiting, the belief that the slot machine will finally pay out if you just try one more time. I've been sitting with people in pain for a very long time, and I can tell you that the pattern is almost always the same. People don't heal by stopping the missing. They heal by understanding it so completely that it loses its hold, by following the missing back like a thread to its source, by finding the original wound in childhood, in the nervous system, in the blueprint, and finally giving it the attention it has been trying to extract from entirely the wrong people. The person who hurt you could not give you what you needed. Not because you weren't worthy of it, but because they didn't have it. You were, in some fundamental way, two incomplete people trying to fill a gap neither of you knew how to fill. That is not a failure of love. That is the human condition. And the hopeful thing about the human condition is this: the capacity for growth is equal to the capacity for pain. Every person I have watched truly grieve has come out the other side with something deeper, a clearer understanding of themselves, a more honest knowledge of what they need, and eventually a radar for what real safety feels like in a relationship. You will not always miss them this much, not because the memories disappear, they won't, but because, if you do the work, your life will eventually become full enough that the myth loses its power. You will be able to look back and say, "That happened. It hurt. I learned things I couldn't have learned any other way, and I'm still here." The missing is not forever, but right now, if it is present, let it speak. Pull up a chair, as I said at the beginning. Listen carefully, because it knows things about you that you need to know. In its own painful, exhausting way, it is trying to bring you home, to yourself.